Good morning. Welcome to the Sanders Report. Today is October 25th, 2024. I wanted to talk today about an article I read on the Washington Post. The title of the article was Trump Alumni Warn He Could Deploy Troops Against Americans. Now, what this article is talking about is martial law. It's talking about Trump implementing martial law, essentially using the federal military to police domestically within the United States. Military occupation. Pretty much what our military's been doing to other countries all around the world for decades. In this article, we've got lots of quotes and statements from the current usual suspects. Got General Miley, General John Kelly, who's Trump's former chief of staff. Got Mark Esper, John Bolton. You know, lots of guys that are coming out being critical of Donald Trump, and they worked in former President Trump's previous administration. And some of these guys, when you saw Trump appointing them to his last administration, it really made you question the authenticity of Donald Trump's claim to want to drain the swamp. Especially when you see guys like John Bolton. John Bolton, if you're not familiar with him, he's a Republican insider. He's been around for decades. This guy is the epitome of a neocon, war hawk, foreign interventionist. Of the worst kinds. This guy was part of the Project for a New American Century. He advocated going into Iraq. He's advocated going into just about every country in the world, it seems like. This guy loves war, but he does not want to fight in war, I'll tell you that. When he was younger, he avoided deployment to Vietnam by getting student deferments. And then after that, he joined the Maryland Air National Guard in order to avoid being drafted and deployed. So it's cowards like that I find to be quite despicable, considering they're always so willing to want to send other people off to do the fighting and the dirty work. John Bolton got his start working through USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development, which operates kind of as a front group. They supposedly are all about, using the United States to provide disaster relief and economic relief to all these other countries that need it. But they're more of a front group operational thing for the military, for the CIA, in order for them to run covert operations. They coordinate with other NGOs, and that's how we do things. If we don't do it outright through military intervention, then we do it covertly through USA and CIA funding NGOs or other groups. But that's enough about John Bolton. We can do a whole episode on John Bolton, USAID, and people like that. There's plenty of them. But back to the article. It quotes General Kelly, and he says, to use the U.S. military in terms of domestic law enforcement, it's not the American way. And absolutely, I agree with that 100%. But the thing is, it's not just Donald Trump. It's Kamala Harris. It's Joe Biden. It's Barack Obama. It's George W. Bush. All of these people would love to be able to implement martial law. If it's just the authoritarian's dream, and that's really what we have. We've had administration after administration of authoritarians, and the unfortunate thing is, our country has a lot of people, I think, that would accept it. given the right conditions. An economic collapse, civil unrest, a terrorist attack. I think there's a lot of people in this country that would welcome martial law as long as it made them feel safe. And what they're talking about in this article primarily is in 2020 when Donald Trump was apparently toying with the idea of implementing martial law to kind of suppress some of the protests and riots that were going on in wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And I mean, those were pretty wild times. It was pretty out of control. A lot of people will tell you that it was just protesting and freedom of speech, but there was a lot of rioting. There was a lot of chaos, looting. Don't get me wrong, there were definitely those people that were just exercising their First Amendment, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine and absolutely what people should do. But there was a stark difference between the people that were simply protesting and the people that were out rioting and taking advantage of the situation. I'm here in Louisville and I saw firsthand the things that were going on during the Breonna Taylor protest here. During the daytime, you had people that were just out with their signs and using their freedom of speech, protesting what happened, abuses of the police department. And then at nighttime, you could see the crowd kind of shift. You started getting the Antifa crowd. You started getting the people wearing all black, wearing the helmets, wearing the face coverings. And it was crazy. I mean, it was out of control. If you were down on Broadway, I mean, there were cars, heavy traffic, cars going 45, 50 miles an hour. This isn't like on an expressway or highway. This is on a street in downtown Louisville. And the cars are driving, doing donuts, whipping around, busting U-turns at high rates of speed, running red lights, running stop signs. It's really amazing that not more people got hurt or killed. It was really crazy. A lot of looting. And raises the questions of, were they agent provocateurs? Was this COINTELPRO? Was this people self-sabotaging that movement because they wanted to be able to come in and stop the protesters? I don't know. It got so out of control that you started to question, was this intentional? Was the government trying to create the conditions to where people would ask for martial law? Was the government trying to let things get so bad that if martial law was implemented, people would say, well, you needed to do that? That's my concern. My concern is that the conditions will be created through some type of emergency event, maybe economic, maybe terrorist attack. I don't know, but there is the potential for people to beg for martial law because people, when things get crazy like that, they want order, and the government would be more than happy to step in with an authoritarian solution. That's why whenever we do protest or whenever we do engage in some form of civil disobedience, you have to remain peaceful. You have to remain peaceful. You cannot be violent. Do not destroy property. Because as soon as you start to act out of line or violently, you've given them the justification to step in with authoritarian measures. But the thing I find ironic is, the current administration is claiming they're concerned about Donald Trump getting elected and implementing martial law. But it was just a month ago that the Department of Defense revised a directive, Department of Defense Directive 5240.01, to basically authorize further federal intervention and the use of lethal force. I got this email from the Campaign for Liberty, which is a Ron Paul organization. And if you're not familiar with Ron Paul, he was a multiple term congressman from Texas. At one point, he was the libertarian candidate for president, and he tried to use the Republican Party apparatus to institute and spread libertarian ideas. And Ron Paul's really a principled statesman. You know, he wasn't just a politician. He was actually somebody that educated people and cared about what the constitutional rights of the people were. And I've read several of his books. I was a big supporter of his when he was trying to get the Republican nomination in 2012. That didn't work out. I went to a protest in D.C. with a libertarian activist, Adam Kokesh, and participated in a troops march for Ron Paul. That was pretty cool. But Ron Paul was a really good congressman, and it's unfortunate that we don't have more leaders like that. But anyway, this organization, Campaign for Liberty, they send out these emails from time to time, and for the most part, they're just trying to, get donations, raise money like most organizations are. But they always, usually throw in a bunch of little facts or little points of interest that if you look into them, it's usually informational, and they can, I like them because they help spread information, and they're calls to action. Usually they're kind of things prompting you to call your representatives, which is what we need more of. We need more people that are frustrated calling their politicians and airing their concerns. And I know a lot of people say, well, it doesn't do any good. But if all you do is complain, but you don't actually call your representatives, they're not gonna listen. And they might not listen anyway, but at least you can say that you tried. So I'm going to go ahead. I'd like to read this email to you all. And it starts off, it says, American soldiers in full combat gear jump out of a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, an MRAP. Black Hawk helicopters provide surveillance. Not in a war zone, but in Philadelphia. Now, this isn't talking about something that really happened. I'm breaking away from the email. They're just trying to paint a picture of kind of what that would look like if you had martial law within the United States. It says, preposterous, you're thinking. America is a free country. Remember COVID? The government loves using an emergency to suspend people's rights. And after the pandemic, they've seen they can get away with it. Right now, it seems likely the next excuse could be the elections that are just 12 days away. On September 27th, the Department of Defense revised Directive 5240.01, their directive on providing intelligence assistance to law enforcement agencies and other civil authorities. The updated directive would allow the U.S. military to assist federal, state, and local law enforcement with deadly force assets in American communities. This directly violates the 150-year-old Posse Comitatus Act, which bars federal troops from participating in civilian law enforcement. But the directive claims to use the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, passed post 9/11, for its authority. I'm going to deviate from the email again, but basically the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 was just further legislation that basically allowed for consolidation of authority to the executive branch of the government. You know, that was one of the things that was terrible about George W. Bush's administration, was how much power was basically usurped away from the Congress and given to the executive branch. Which there, you know, I mean, there was a reason that the powers of government were divided amongst, you know, the three different branches when the country was founded. And there was so much consolidation to the executive branch under George W. Bush. That's one of the things that kind of shook me in 2008 when I woke up. I actually opened up my eyes, because I used to be just a Republican and, you know, supported Bush. I didn't know anything. I was young. I was 23 at the time. And, you know, I just was like, oh, I'm a Republican because my dad's a Republican, and that's what I identified as. And I didn't really know, you know, why. I didn't know a lot about it. You know, you just paid lip service to these things. I swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution when I joined the Marine Corps, but I had never read the Constitution. I'd read like the Bill of Rights. You know, I remember memorizing the preamble when I was in high school, but I didn't really know a lot about it. And I mean, I'm sure we covered some of the amendments and stuff, but I never actually read the articles, understood really, you know, what powers were granted to Congress and all that. But, you know, that's what a lot of these post 9/11 military bills did. They consolidated power to allow for, you know, basically setting the precedent for, at some point in the future, you know, an authoritarian, you know, leader to basically take control. You know, similar to this DoD directive, you know, at the time during the Bush administration, there was the National Security Presidential Directive 51 and Homeland Security Presidential Directive 20, which both of these were for continuity of government, you know, provisions, and they basically allowed all government operations to be under the control of a contingency operator. It was a contingency coordinator, and I think the actual term was National Continuity Coordinator is what it was called. But so I mean, they've been doing this. You know what I mean? Like this isn't something that just happened with the Biden administration. These things have been going on for decades. It's like they've been like putting in the puzzle pieces for years. But that's actually a good segue back into the email. So this is going back to the email now. It says, that's how the federal government operates. It passes a bill that could be abused, assuring the public it would never be abused, and the basis for abuse lies dormant until one day it gets put into use. That's why it's so critical you and I take action right now. Tell Congress right now, stop the militarization of the police. Terminate Directive 5240.01. No president, whether it's Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, or Donald Trump, should have the ability to use the military to police American streets with lethal force. We can guess what the Biden-Harris administration had in mind when they updated this directive. We have been told by many people in the mass media that Donald Trump is a threat to America. Even after 2 attempted assassinations on the former president, the incendiary rhetoric has only escalated. But if the Biden administration actually believes Donald Trump could become a dictator if he is reelected, why would they give him this ability through this directive? Think about it. If Trump is the threat they claim, why risk giving him the authority to use the military in civilian affairs? It just doesn't make sense. It makes you wonder if maybe they have another plan in mind, using the election as a pretext to weaken the critical separation between military and civilian government. History tells us what happens when the military is weaponized against a country's civilian population. We must not allow it to happen in America. Whatever opinion you have of former President Donald Trump, it goes almost without saying the American deep state wants to destroy him and would stop at nothing to do so. Remember in 2020, the FBI planned, ordered, and executed a plot to stage a kidnapping of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. This was the conclusion of a jury that found 2 conspirators not guilty because of entrapment. Now I'm going to deviate again here. If anybody doesn't remember that kidnapping plot, I believe there was 12 different FBI informants involved with that organization. So, like many times before, we see this, big plot get exposed, and then you find out that they knew about it. You know what I mean? Like, we have these intelligence agencies and police organizations that they know about this stuff before it happens. It was just like when the guys did the initial World Trade Center bombing back in '93. Like, there were FBI informants that were working within that group before the bomb went off. Or just like the 9/11 terrorists, you find out that there were FBI informants that were, helping these guys. So one of the guys that that was one of the main informants for the FBI for the Whitmer kidnapping thing. It says, let's see here, his name was Dan Chappell. He was an Army veteran. And after he became an informant, he moved his way up through this little militias group and became their executive officer, which was the second highest ranking guy in the group. And then after its highest ranked officer left the group, this guy took the lead. So this guy was the head of the little militia that was going to kidnap Governor Whitmer. And this guy's an FBI informant. So he's leading the group. And he's teaching the group tactical skills that he learned while he was in the Army. He offered the group the use of a credit card, which was paid for by the FBI, to buy ammunition and supplies. And he spent hours on the phone with the main guy in the plot planning the kidnapping. So that sounds like a whole lot of involvement by an FBI informant as far as getting the ball rolling on a kidnapping plot. So again, you see the deep state intelligence agencies working to basically, create a problem so that way they can step in and say like, oh, look at these domestic terrorists. Look at these domestic terrorists. And that's what a lot of people need to realize. All these people that support these anti-terrorist legislations, like the stuff in the Patriot Act. I get in arguments all the time with quote unquote patriots. Well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then you shouldn't worry about it. The government should be able to spy on you, and they support all these authoritarian measures, not even recognizing that, that destroys your constitutional rights. But they're so indoctrinated, and they buy into the narrative that their team's the good guys, and so this bill's got to be good because it's trying to stop terrorism. And just like I pointed out for some of the acts I spoke about earlier, it's just setting it up. So why do you want to give any type of authoritarian power just because your guys, your administration is in office? Because guess what? In a few years, your administration might lose, and now the table's turned, and now you've given that authority to somebody else. You got to be very careful with just wanting to give authority to the government, because a government with unlimited authority is a very dangerous thing, especially to people that like freedom. But anyway, we'll go back to the email. So the FBI announced the arrest on October 8th, 2020, just in time to influence voters in a swing state. It's not too late for an October surprise or a national security incident on Election Day itself. If that sounds fantastical, realize the government has a long history of agitating conflict in the USA. In the 1960s, the FBI encouraged black nationalist organizations to discredit and split the civil rights movement as part of Operation COINTELPRO. The FBI egged on violence on both the left and right over the years. It's what they need people to do, because they give the FBI a reason to exist. And for the last 8 years, the mass media has been accusing Donald Trump of being an existential threat to democracy. Certainly some people honestly believe this. And some believe ginning up violence as grounds for preventing a peaceful transition of power is saving America from itself. I certainly hope our fears are unfounded, but we can't afford to give the government this power and find out later that we were right. Tell Congress right now, stop the militarization of the police. Okay, and that's basically it. But again, like I think this email is really good. It gives people direction to where if they're not familiar with some of these things, you say, "Oh, what's that?" I can go look that up. I can read about that. Like, oh, COINTELPRO? I've never heard of COINTELPRO. That's just the it's basically the abbreviation or acronym that they have for the counterintelligence program, which was an illegal FBI program to surveil, infiltrate, discredit, and disrupt American political organizations that the FBI perceived as a subversive group. Now, at the time in the 60s, they were really focused on a lot of leftist groups, Black Panthers, the American Indian Movement, just a bunch of organizations at the time, because then they could justify going in there and saying like, oh, look at these people, they're a real threat, people that were speaking out against the war. That's a threat to the military industrial complex. You can't have that. So you have the deep state again. People say it's not a real thing, it's a conspiracy. But this stuff isn't conspiracy theory. It might be sensationalized by people online. I'm not saying that. That's something I always said about Alex Jones. Alex Jones, if you actually look at a lot of his information, it's accurate. Like he sensationalizes it to a point where it's easily to stigmatize you as just a conspiracy theorist. You get a guy running around yelling, freaking out, and, making all sorts of wild claims. Well, if the things that he talked about, it's real easy to tie that together and be dismissive of it. That's what I remember the first time I came across him, like a friend of mine, it was just after the 2008 election, and I was in that process of, the TARP bailout had just happened, and I was in this process of like, I was completely confused because, John McCain and the Republicans and all these people, they supported the bailouts, they supported all this stuff, which flew in the face of actual capitalism. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand it. It's that cognitive dissonance that, you're trying to rationalize what's going on with what you think your belief system is. And my friend said, hey, you got to watch this movie. I think it was called The Obama Deception. And I was, I didn't like Obama out of policy, not for any other reason. He's got terrible policies that I don't agree with. And my friend showed me this, Alex Jones documentary. And I remember thinking, okay, dude, like, this is propaganda, bro. Like, I don't like Obama, but this is ridiculous. It's going on about, the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations, and there's all these, big bloated bureaucrats that have been there for years that are actually running. And I'm like, okay, man, this is like, I thought I was smart. Like, And so I said, look, I'm gonna write down a bunch of this stuff, and I basically watched the movie again. I took a bunch of notes, and aside from the sensationalism, that you get with Alex Jones, a lot of the stuff he's talking about was concerning. And I was like, oh man, like this stuff's crazy. Like I can't even believe it. I've never even heard of some of this stuff, but it was real. And then that took me to another one of Alex Jones's movies, Endgame. And I remember, like, as soon as I started that, he's being real critical of George Bush, and I'm thinking like, okay, I knew this dude was crazy because George Bush is great. He's the Republican, and I just got out of the Marine Corps, and we love George Bush, blah blah blah. And then that's when I started realizing, like, wait a minute, like George Bush is no friend of the Constitution. George Bush is no friend of the Bill of Rights. And that basically put me on the path that I went on now. But I just wanted that brings me into what I was talking about is I was looking up stuff about the Department of Defense Directive 5240.01, and it's all fact check. That's false. This isn't true. Blah blah blah. Well, again, there's probably some people that are sensationalizing it. But if you go to the DoD website, which you can do, you can always pull up a lot of this stuff online. All you got to do is searches and make sure you go to the official sites, the government sites like the .mils, .gov, all that. And you can see what these people are saying and doing. Like you can read their white papers where they're talking about all this stuff. You can go to Federal Reserve data. You can find all this stuff out. So when people are telling you about it, don't just take them at their word. Go look at this stuff. And that's what I mean. Then you can be like, okay, like it might not be what you're saying, but it is a concern. That's a quote I got from Chris Duane. The quote was, listen to all, follow none. And Chris Duane, he was a former Marine that used to do this series called Silver Bullet, Silver Shield. And he did these great videos online. They were called the Sons of Liberty Academy. But he did great material. I don't know what happened to him. I haven't seen anything from him online. But he said, listen to all, follow none. And that's my advice to anybody listening to this. Listen to all, follow none, do your own research. You know what I mean? You can pick up little bits and pieces here and there, and you can start recognizing that, hey, like the people that are running our government do not have our best interest at heart, or if they do, they're willing to support things that they might not see the big picture, and they're laying the framework for authoritarian, totalitarian government in the future. You know what I mean? They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So think about that. But anyway, so let's look at DoD Directive 5240.01. And if you go to Section 3, that is the Defense Intelligence Component Assistance to Law Enforcement Agencies and Other Civil Authorities. Now I'm reading this like this is verbatim. I'm going to read you the exact text as it's written. I'm not going to embellish anything. And then I'll tell you what I think. But so you get to Section 3.3, it states, defense intelligence components may provide personnel to assist a federal department or agency, including a federal law enforcement agency or a state or local law enforcement agency when lives are in danger, in response to a request for such assistance in accordance with the following approval authorities. Then it gives you a section of people that, can make these approvals. And under the section, Secretary of Defense approval. So the Secretary of Defense is one of the people that can give these approvals. It is Section 2, subsection C, assistance in responding with assets with potential for lethality or any situation in which it is reasonably foreseeable that providing the requested assistance may involve the use of force that is likely to result in lethal force, including death or serious bodily injury. It also includes all support to civilian law enforcement officials in situations where a confrontation between civilian law enforcement and civilian individuals or groups is reasonably anticipated. And that's the part that has been, adjusted or amended or whatever you want to call it. But that's pretty straightforward. It tells you like they can be sent out with those requests and possibly result in lethal force involving death or serious bodily injury. Now, devil's advocate, just like you'll hear, what do you want them to do? They do need the ability to maintain order. It's a slippery slope. Like I said, if you've got riots going on and it's completely, chaotic, what do you do? You know what I mean? Like, do you just let your country deteriorate? It's kind of one of the things that we did when the CIA couped Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. That was the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, and I'll do a whole show on that. I read this great book called All the Shah's Men by Stephen Kinzer, and he really did a real good job. But one of the things that we did was we were trying to cause instability within Iran. So the CIA, along with British intelligence, was, basically like supporting like two opposing groups that were fighting with each other in the streets, and there was all this chaos. And we had our U.S. ambassador go to Mossadegh, who at the time didn't realize we were basically trying to get him out of power. The ambassador tells Mossadegh, like, hey, look, if you can't keep peace in your country, we're out. You know what I mean? He's like, the United States is out. Well, Mossadegh was like super desperate, to get U.S. support. So the last thing he wanted was the U.S. ambassador to leave and, hurt relations with the United States. So Mossadegh actually supported going out and kind of like repressing these people's ability to go out and protest because it was, getting out of control. And, a lot of Mossadegh's supporters turned on him, because he was supported by a lot of, like the intellectual class at the time that wanted these changes that he had promised. And so they were kind of like, oh, look, he's a hypocrite. He's not really supporting this freedom of speech, So again, like, what do you do? But like, they played him like a fiddle, and got it, and they manipulated him into doing just what they knew he would have to do. So it's kind of like, what are we doing? Like, these protests, like you saw a lot of organization that seemed like it was top down or funded by somebody. And I'm not making claims as to who that was. You can go online. There's a lot of people that will speculate as to who was, providing what and doing what. But at the end of the day, all you need to know is it was chaos and people were getting really desperate for order. And that's what you see. So it's like, I can kind of understand the government's position, but the question is, why would they update this directive just before the election? And like I said, especially if they think Donald Trump, like if that's their big fear, like they're putting out this article, Trump alumni warned he could deploy troops against Americans. So why would they update this directive right before the election? It doesn't make sense to me, and that's what I mean. Not saying that it does mean anything. I'm just saying it's something to consider, make you think, and for all the people out there, they'll say, oh, well, you never have to worry about the United States military. The United States would never, the people would never turn on their own people. Well, all you got to do is go back to Hurricane Katrina. They went door to door and took people's guns. You can look that up online too. That's a fact. There were people that were going around and looting, and that gave them justification. Excuse me. that gave them justification to go door to door and take people's guns. And there's one guy from the National Guard, and he's being interviewed by somebody from one of the media outlets. I'm not sure. You can find it on YouTube. But he says, it's just really hard thinking about what you might have to do. And the reporter says, you mean shoot an American? And he's like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I'm telling you all, like, it's not what you think, especially about the military. You know what I mean? Like, I was in the Marine Corps, and people are not as informed and not as aware, or they just think that that's the right thing to do. All it takes is the justification. You create the circumstance, and you can make the people, you be like, oh, if you're telling the soldiers what they're doing is to, create order and bring things back, they're going to think like, hey man, this is what we got to do. After the Boston Marathon bombing, if you remember, they shut Boston down. This is the 11th largest city in the country, and they basically shut it down. And people, like, you had SWAT teams going door to door, searching these people's homes for this, guy that was linked to the bombing. I'm sorry. I don't care what's going on. If you come to my house, regardless of what's going on, if you don't have a warrant, you're not coming in my house. Like, get a warrant, find the probable cause to come search my home, and then I'll let you in. But if not, I have the Fourth Amendment right. You're not going to come into my house. I've got no links to anybody like that. You are not going to do that. But people in Boston were just letting them do that, because they created the conditions, right? Oh, hey, we're looking for a terrorist. So yeah, that seems reasonable, right? Why would you want to interfere in that? Like, the guy's a bad guy. You want to help them catch him, right? But think about it. Is it worth giving up your Fourth Amendment right? Is it worth suspending the Bill of Rights? Now, again, people are going to say, oh, he's sensationalizing that, because they didn't really shut down the city. Governor Deval Patrick asked people to voluntarily shelter in place. That's the way people say it. But to me, that just seems like a nudge technique, which, if you're not familiar with that, this guy, Cass Sunstein, he's a big bureaucrat. He wrote this book called Nudge a long time ago. I'm not a big fan of this guy, because he's all about, well, if you can't make people do it, you'll just nudge them in the direction that you want them to go. Basically trying to manipulate people into giving you the outcome that you want, where it still seems like they're making the decision on their own, but you kind of influence them to make that decision. So basically, they were nudged into shutting down the city of Boston. So, but that's it. That's all I really wanted to talk about today. So I'll try to get some more material and put it out there. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like it, whatever. Don't like it, I don't care. It's I got the right to think what I think. You got the right to think what you think. All that's important is I'm willing to listen to what you got to say, and you're willing to listen to what I got to say, and we're not trying to shut each other down or cancel each other, any of that kind of stuff, One of my favorite quotes is Voltaire. He said, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend in my death your right to say it. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. So hope all y'all have a great day, and thank you for listening.